the 5 laws of letting go that nobody explains until it's too late. Heraclitus, the old Greek thinker Jung returned to again and again while writing about the opposites, left one fragment that fits this exactly, preserved in the Diels Krantz collection as fragment 60. The way up and the way down are one and the same. And Jung would stop you right there and say, "Do you see it? The 2 directions you have spent your life treating as enemies are in fact one single road walked from 2 ends, which means the letting go you are straining toward is not a departure from what you are holding, it is that very same road, walked the other way, and you cannot walk a road you have refused to look at, honestly even once. So if you have ever tried to let go of a person, a version of yourself, an old ambition, and felt the grip only tighten the harder you pulled, you were not failing at letting go. You were breaking a law nobody had ever explained to you. So here, quietly, 3 small admissions. I stopped treating my letting go as a war I must win by force. I let both of my truths stand in the same room without dragging one of them out the door before it has finished speaking. And beneath all of it, I make the unconscious conscious. Say it with me. I make the unconscious conscious. Again, I make the unconscious conscious. And if you would like tomorrow's teaching to find you the way this one just did, consider staying close by subscribing. So it can. If something in you just went quiet hearing that, type the 2 words "face it" in the comments. Just those 2 words, and let them be the marker of exactly where you are standing tonight. The first key is that letting go is not dropping the rope, it is ending the war over who gets to hold it. You have pictured letting go your whole life as one clean and dramatic gesture, the fist opening, the object falling away into the dark, and because that image never quite arrives on schedule, you have quietly decided you are failing at something everyone else seems to manage with ease. But Jung taught that the psyche does not work in clean gestures, it works in opposites. And inside nearly everything you are trying to release, there are 2 voices, not one. The voice that wants to leave, and the voice that is terrified of the silence after. The voice that wants to forgive, and the voice that still wants the debt repaid in full. And what you have been calling letting go is usually just picking one voice, gagging the other, and mistaking the sudden quiet for peace. Imagine a woman deciding to leave a marriage that has gone cold. She tells her friends she has let go, but what she has actually done is throw her whole weight onto the leaving voice and lock the frightened one in a closet down the hall. And a locked voice does not dissolve, it waits, and it shows up later as a dread with no name at 3 in the morning. Or think of an ordinary Tuesday. You decide at breakfast that you have finally released the old friendship that hurt you. By lunch, you feel almost proud of yourself, lighter, finished, and then a song plays in a shop, or a name appears on a screen, and the whole locked closet swings open at once. Not because you are inconsistent, but because you never actually let both voices speak. You only silenced one long enough to call it victory. Picture 2, a man clearing out his late mother's house. He fills box after box for donation, with brisk, efficient hands, calling it healthy, calling it moving forward. And then he finds a single chipped teacup at the bottom of a drawer, and he sits down on the floor of an empty room for an hour. Not because he is broken, but because the grief he had declared finished was never asked its opinion. It had simply been outvoted. This is the first law nobody explains. You cannot let go of what you have not first allowed to stand fully in the light, both sides of it, together, without rushing to crown a winner before the truth has finished arriving. A rope held by one hand only looks released. It is still a rope, still taut, still yours, and the harder that one hand pulls, thinking it is finally winning, the tighter the whole rope becomes, because a rope cannot be released from only one end. So notice this week, the moment you feel the old pull to force a verdict and call it release, and ask, gently, what the quieter voice, the one you keep talking over, has actually been trying to tell you, not to obey it, only to hear it. Because a voice that has finally been heard tends to loosen its grip on its own, I stop crowning a winner and start listening to both. The second key is that most of what passes for letting go is only the grip changing hands. Not opening, you release the job and grip the next ambition with the same white knuckles. You release the relationship and grip a new one, or a hobby, or a diet, or a cause, with the identical desperate fist, and you call this moving on. But it is not moving on. It is the same tension wearing a new coat, and the tragedy of it is how convincing the new coat can be. Because everyone around you applauds the change. They say, look how far you have come, look how you have grown, and you nod along, half believing it yourself, while the old white-knuckled grip simply migrates to a fresh object and calls itself progress. Imagine a man who spent 15 years chasing a promotion, and when it finally arrived hollow, he announced he had let go of ambition entirely, and threw himself instead into training for marathons with a ferocity that looked suspiciously like the old ambition wearing running shoes. He woke at 5, logged every mile, punished himself over missed splits, the same way he once punished himself over missed quarterly targets, and his family noticed before he did. The tension in his jaw had not eased, it had only relocated to a new finish line. Follow him a little further, and you will see the pattern repeat. When the marathon stopped satisfying him, he gripped a strict diet, and when the diet stopped satisfying him, he gripped a new relationship, each time believing this was finally the clean break, each time simply moving the same fist to a new handle. And notice how ordinary this looks from the outside. Nobody at his office ever said he seemed like a man still gripping something. They said he seemed inspired, motivated, finally living, which is exactly how the disguise survives so long. Because a grip dressed as growth is nearly impossible to catch in the mirror, you have to feel for the tightness in your own chest, rather than trust the story you are telling about yourself. Ask yourself something small and specific. When you wake in the morning, is there a low hum of urgency already running before your feet touch the floor? A sense that today must be spent well, proven, justified. Because if that hum is present, the object underneath it may have changed a dozen times over the years, and the hum itself never has. This is the second law nobody explains. Letting go that immediately reaches for a replacement was never letting go at all. It was substitution, and substitution keeps the tension of opposites fully alive underneath a new name. The psyche does not care what the object is, only whether the grip has actually loosened. So ask yourself honestly, when you say you have released something, is there a new grip already forming? A new object already being gripped with the same old urgency? Because if there is, the letting go has not happened yet. Only its costume has changed. And Jung's whole teaching on the opposites insists that the tension has to be met directly, felt in its own shape, in your own chest, before anything real can move, not smuggled onto a new target where it can hide a while longer, wearing a better disguise. Notice this week where your hands have quietly found a new thing to hold the very moment an old thing loosened. And before you praise yourself for moving on, ask what exactly moved, the object in your hand, or the hand itself. I stop swapping grips and start feeling the one I already have. The third key is that the tension you are trying to escape is not the obstacle to letting go, it is the workshop where letting go is actually made. Jung wrote about this most directly in his commentary on an old Chinese text called The Secret of the Golden Flower, where he described a turning point in the psyche that occurs only when a person stops trying to resolve two opposing truths by killing one of them, and instead simply holds both, uncomfortably, without collapsing into either side, and out of that held discomfort, something new is able to form that neither side could have produced alone. Jung called this the transcendent function, and he wrote plainly, the greatest and most important problems of life can never be solved, but only outgrown, which is a very different claim than the one you were raised on. You were taught that a problem is a door you kick down, that a decision is a knot you cut. But Jung is saying something closer to what a blacksmith knows, that a blade is never made by choosing the hammer over the anvil. It is made by the metal sitting exactly between the two, struck and held, until the shape that neither tool could produce alone finally appears. Take that image seriously for a moment. because it means the very discomfort you keep trying to end, the sitting between two forces, is not a delay before the real work. It is the real work. And here is another way to see the same thing. Think of a river with two banks. The water is never released by removing one of the banks. If you did that, you would not have a river anymore. You would have a flood with nowhere to go. The current only becomes a river, only becomes something that carries a boat anywhere at all, because both banks hold their shape against it at once, and the tension you feel between two truths is doing the same quiet work, holding a channel for something in you that has nowhere yet to run. Let me walk you through an ordinary day the way this actually plays out. Morning, you wake already rehearsing the argument for leaving. By 10 o'clock, you have built an airtight case, complete with dates and evidence. By noon, a memory arrives uninvited, a small kindness from years back, and the case falls apart in your hands. By 3, you have flipped completely to the case for staying, defending the very thing you condemned at 10. By 6, you are exhausted, not because you are weak, and not because you cannot make up your mind, but because you have spent the entire day standing between the hammer and the anvil, being struck from both sides, and mistaking the striking for a failure to decide. Imagine, too, a man restoring an old house who wants the new floor laid by Friday. He keeps checking the wood, pressing his palm against it, hoping the grain has settled early, but wood does not care about Friday. It settles on its own clock, in its own damp, and its own dark, and if he lays the floor before it has finished moving, the boards will buckle within the year. Or imagine two sisters dividing their late mother's house. One wants to sell it quickly and be done with the grief. The other wants to keep every chair exactly where it stood, and for months they argue as if only one of them can be right, until the day they simply sit together in the empty kitchen, saying nothing, letting both griefs occupy the same room, and it is only then, in that silence neither one forced, that a decision neither had proposed quietly becomes obvious to them both. This is the third law nobody explains. The exhaustion of an unresolved tension is not a sign you are doing letting go wrong, it is the necessary heat of the workshop itself, the friction before the shape appears, and there is no shortcut through it, only a slower walking through it. So instead of spending tomorrow trying to win the argument inside you by noon, try simply naming both sides out loud, the one that wants to go and the one that wants to stay, and let them sit in the same room without a verdict. Because Jung's whole point about the opposites is that the third thing, the real resolution, only shows up once the demand for an immediate verdict has been quietly withdrawn. The hammer does not decide the shape of the blade, and neither does the anvil. The shape comes from what happens between them, held long enough, struck often enough, without either one ever winning outright. I stop demanding a verdict and let the workshop do its slow work. The fourth key is that letting go cannot be willed on a schedule. And this is the law that wounds the most people, because we live in a culture that treats waiting as weakness. You want the ache to be over by Friday. You want the third thing Jung described to arrive on your terms and your timetable, and when it does not, you decide you are doing it wrong, or that you are simply too weak to let go the way other people apparently do. But the tension of opposites has its own clock, not yours, and forcing it only produces the appearance of resolution, the kind that snaps back the moment you are tired or alone. Think of how this actually looks in an ordinary week. You decide on a Sunday night that this is the week you finally stop checking your phone for a message that is not coming. You tell yourself, with real conviction, that by Wednesday you will feel nothing when the name crosses your mind. Monday, you manage it, barely. Tuesday, you slip once at lunch and feel a flash of shame that has nothing to do with the slip itself and everything to do with breaking your own deadline. By Wednesday evening, right on schedule, you check anyway. And instead of simply noticing the old ache is still there, which would be the honest and unremarkable truth, you decide the whole effort has failed, when in fact, nothing has failed except the calendar you built without the psyche's permission. This is how most people quietly abandon real inner work, not because the work was wrong, but because they measured it against a date that was never theirs to set. Here is a small practice worth trying honestly. Take a page, draw a line down the middle. On the left, write, in its own words, exactly what the voice that wants release is saying. On the right, write, in its own words, exactly what the voice that fears release is saying. Do not argue with either column. Do not edit them into something more reasonable. Simply let both stand in their own language, and then, this is the hard part, do nothing else. Close the page and wait. Not for a fixed number of days, but simply until something in you shifts on its own, without your hand on the scale. Jung's caution about this kind of inner work was always the same. Hold both sides honestly, and do not force the outcome. Because the waiting itself is not passivity, it is the labor. A farmer does not stand over a planted field pulling gently at the stalks to help them along. He waits through weeks that look, from the outside, exactly like nothing happening. The seed under snow is not doing nothing either. It is doing the one thing that cannot be rushed. And if you dug it up every few days to check on its progress, out of impatience, out of fear that waiting means failing, you would kill the very thing you were trying to help grow. This is precisely what a self-imposed deadline does to an unresolved grief, or an unfinished goodbye. It digs up the seed to check on it, again and again, mistaking disturbance for progress. So if you have been telling yourself you should be over this by now, consider that the timetable you are angry at yourself for missing was never a real law of the psyche. It was a borrowed impatience, borrowed from calendars and quarterly reviews and other people's timelines that had nothing to do with what is actually happening in you. And the fourth law nobody explains is that the waiting you resent is the very letting go you are trying to force. The two are not opposites. They are the same slow process, seen from two different moods. I stop punishing myself for a clock that was never real. And if this teaching is finding you at the right hour, stay for what is coming, because the next key is the one most people never reach. Subscribing simply means tomorrow's key finds you too, so it can meet you exactly where you are. The fifth key is the one almost nobody explains in full, because it has 3 parts, and each part turns the same key a little deeper. So let's take them one at a time, slowly, because this is the part that actually changes something. First, consider this. The 2 voices inside your tension are not there to be judged. They are there to be fully heard, not summarized, not managed, not politely nodded at on the way to a decision. Actually heard. The voice that wants to leave has real reasons, and you owe it the discipline of listing them honestly, in full sentences, not in the shorthand you use when you are trying to hurry past your own conscience. The voice that wants to stay has real reasons too, and it deserves the same honesty, the same full sentences, the same patience. Most people give one side a fair hearing and treat the other like an inconvenience to be talked down, like a relative at a holiday table whose opinions are tolerated but never actually considered. And Jung's whole method depended on refusing that shortcut. Both sides of you, he insisted, are telling some part of the truth, even when they contradict each other completely, especially when they contradict each other completely, because the psyche was never built to speak with one voice. It was built to hold many, and the tension between them is not a malfunction. It is the shape of a mind that has not yet lied to itself for the sake of comfort. Imagine 2 brothers who inherit their father's small hardware store. One wants to sell it within the year. The numbers are honest, the neighborhood has changed, the margins are thin, and he can list every reason with a spreadsheet open in front of him. The other wants to keep it running exactly as it always has, and his reasons live nowhere on a spreadsheet. They live in the smell of the back room, the customers who still ask after their mother, a version of loyalty that cannot be argued with figures because it was never made of figures. Most families would force one brother to win and one to lose. But notice what happens if neither reason is dismissed. If the numbers are allowed to be true and the loyalty is allowed to be true at the very same time, something in the room changes, not because a winner has been declared, but because both truths have finally been permitted to exist in the same breath. Second, consider this. Once both voices have been heard in full, the ego, The part of you that wants to decide has to step back from its favorite job, which is declaring a winner, and this is the hardest part of the whole process, because the ego was built to solve, to choose, to close the file, to move on to the next task with the satisfying click of a completed thing, and here it is being asked instead to simply hold open a question it cannot answer by force. This is not indecision, though it will feel exactly like indecision from the outside, and your friends may even tell you so, gently or not so gently, but it is something else entirely. It is patience with a live wound. It is the willingness to walk around with an open question in your chest for longer than feels dignified. Picture a judge who has already formed an opinion before the second witness has even finished speaking, and who is asked, against every habit of the mind, to set that opinion down, again and again, to keep listening as though the verdict had not already half formed itself. That is the discipline being asked of you here. Not a colder judgment, but a warmer refusal to judge too soon. And Jung called the mechanism that eventually resolves it the transcendent function, precisely because it transcends the either-or that the ego keeps trying to impose on a situation that was never actually either-or to begin with. The ego wants a ruling. The psyche is offering something slower and stranger, a third position that has not been invented yet, and cannot be invented on command, only arrived at, the way a fog does not lift because you have decided you are done waiting for it. Third, and here is where this turns toward you directly, because everything up to now has sounded like it happens to other people. So imagine, for a moment, a woman who has taught at the same school for 11 years. She loves the mornings there, the particular light in the hallway, the students who still write to her years later, but she has also, quietly, for 3 of those 11 years, felt something in her going a little duller each September, a calling she has never named out loud, because naming it would mean admitting the 11 years were not simply building toward something. She wakes some mornings certain she should leave by June, and by the following afternoon certain that leaving would be the great mistake of her life. She has tried, more than once, to force a verdict. She has made lists. She has set deadlines for herself that quietly expired unmet. She has even told a colleague, twice, that she has finally decided, only to feel the decision dissolve by the following week, like frost in morning sun. And each time the verdict fails to hold, she has decided the failure is hers, that she is simply too weak or too indecisive to do what other people apparently do cleanly. But she is not weak, and neither are you. She is standing exactly where the fifth law says a person stands when the tension is being taken seriously rather than rushed. In 1945, Jung wrote to a man who had written to him utterly broken, convinced that this very kind of unresolved conflict meant his life had failed, and Jung answered him with a line that has quietly held up more people than almost anything else he ever wrote. He said the fact that the tension exists, and is fully felt, and has not been papered over with a false and early peace, is proof of the rightness of your life. Not proof that something has gone wrong, but proof that something honest is happening beneath the surface. And here is the part that matters most, the third thing you are waiting for, the resolution that will finally let you set this down, is not a compromise stitched together out of your two positions, some tepid middle ground where neither voice is satisfied. It is a genuinely new thing that neither side could have predicted on its own. Think again of the two brothers. The resolution that eventually found them was not a sale, and it was not a stubborn refusal to sell. It was a slow redesign of the store itself, half kept as it always was, half open to something neither brother had imagined alone, a shape their father's shop had never worn before. And neither of them could have drawn it on the day the argument began. The woman who could not decide whether to stay or leave sometimes finds, months later, that the whole question has quietly stopped applying, not because she chose a side, but because she grew into a person for whom the old argument no longer describes her life. That is what outgrowing actually looks like. It rarely arrives as a verdict handed down on a chosen date. It arrives as a change in the one who was asking the question in the first place. So the letting go you have been forcing, on your page, on your deadlines, in your 3 in the morning arguments with yourself, was never the doorway you thought it was. The growing was the doorway all along, and it only opens once the forcing finally, fully, stops. I stop forcing an ending and let myself become the one who no longer needs it. The sixth key is the quiet one, and it is this. When the third thing finally comes, it will not feel like triumph. You have probably imagined the moment of real letting go as a kind of release. Fireworks. Relief flooding in all at once. The way it happens in films, the door slams, the music swells, the character walks away lighter, and because you keep waiting for that scene to arrive in your own life, you keep missing the much smaller and much realer thing that actually does arrive. Almost everyone who has truly lived through a letting go describes something closer to stillness, an odd, undramatic quiet. The tension that ruled your days for so long simply is not there one morning, and you almost miss the moment it left because it did not leave with a bang. Imagine a man who spent 11 years carrying a low, constant resentment toward his father. He had pictured the end of it 100 times, a final conversation, an apology finally spoken, some scene with weight to it, and none of that ever came. Instead, on an ordinary Tuesday, making coffee before work, he noticed his shoulders were not tight. He noticed he had thought of his father in passing, without the old flinch, and it took him until that evening to even register what had happened. Nothing had been announced. No verdict had been reached. The grip was simply not there anymore. And here is what makes this so easy to miss. He actually spent that whole morning looking for something to worry about, some remnant of the old ache, the way you might pat your pocket for keys you are certain you forgot, and finding nothing, he almost distrusted the emptiness, as if peace itself were suspicious, as if it could not be trusted unless it had first been earned through some visible ordeal that morning. This is the strange trap inside the sixth law. You have suffered long enough over a thing that you have quietly come to believe the suffering itself is the proof that you still care. So when the suffering lifts, some old and tired part of you panics briefly, wondering if the lifting means you have betrayed the years spent carrying it. But it does not. It only means the road Heraclitus described has finished being walked. This is the fifth law nobody explains until it is far too late to have believed it earlier. Letting go, when it is real, is nearly silent. It does not send you a notice in advance. It does not ask to be witnessed. And if you go looking for the fireworks as proof that it has finally happened, you may walk right past the quiet lake it actually left you standing beside. You may even feel a strange flicker of disappointment. Some part of you wanted the drama, wanted the ending, to match the years of struggle it took to reach it. But the psyche does not settle its accounts that way. It settles them the way frost settles, overnight, without a sound, no ceremony, no witnesses, only a small and steady change you notice in hindsight rather than in the moment itself. Remember Heraclitus, the way up and the way down are one and the same road, and you have been walking it the entire time you thought you were merely stuck. Every argument at noon, every exhausted evening, every honest page with 2 columns and no verdict, all of it was the same road, just the part that runs through fog, and the lake at the end of it is not a reward. It is simply what was always waiting once the fog finally lifted. So do not stand at the shore demanding it announce itself. Some mornings the only sign that something enormous has finally shifted is that you forgot, for 1 whole hour, to check whether it had. I let the quiet, when it comes, be enough proof that it is real. Here is the whole picture. Letting go is not the fist opening. It is the war ending. The grip that seems to release is often only relocating. So feel the tension where it actually lives. The exhaustion of an unresolved question is not failure. It is the workshop's own heat. The waiting you resent is not wasted time. It is the one labor that cannot be forced. The 2 voices inside you are both telling some part of the truth. And the third thing arrives, only once you stop trying to crown a winner between them. And when it finally comes, it will not sound like a victory bell. It will sound like almost nothing at all, which is exactly how you will know it is real. These were never 5 separate laws. They were 5 ways of turning the same single key. And that key is simply this: stop fighting the road and start walking it. I make the unconscious conscious. Again, I make the unconscious conscious. And if there is one thing this hour has tried to leave with you, let it be this. The letting go you have been forcing was never lost. It was only waiting for you to stop demanding it before its time. So tonight, wherever you are still gripping something with white knuckles, ask quietly, is this mine to force, or mine to outgrow?